Hello and welcome to ESL Revolution, everyone. I am your professor and content creator, Dr. B. Welcome back to the channel for the second in a series dealing with educational technology. And at the beginning of this series, I am just going through some of the educational theory in a very basic way in order to get us up to speed with why EdTech is necessary in future learning. So I will post a link up in the corner here for the video that I did earlier so you can get caught up with the material. And of course, if you're new to the channel, subscribe, hit the notification button because weekly videos will be coming your way. So in the first video, I talked about essentially three types of educational theory, Jean Piaget, B.F. Skinner, and of course the third one was the idea of constructivism and how that loosely fits into the model of EdTech and why those two things are mutually exclusive is something that I'm going to be talking a little bit more today with you. But the first thing I want to do, and I would be remiss to deal with this, is in fact the potential for negative, or not negative, but things that detract from the constructivism approach, especially when we're dealing with EdTech and also with PBL, which I've talked a great deal already on, so you can go back and take a look at those existing videos. I've no need to rehash that information here. But while there are several benefits to the constructivism approach, and those include things like the students are agents of their own learning. It means they take a more vital role, a more active role in the educational process and in the dynamic that comes into group work. That's one. It is certainly more student-centered rather than teacher-centered. So teachers themselves get out of the lecture type approach and more into the facilitation approach to education. And in all honesty, it is both enjoyable, I think, for the learner and for the teacher. At least that is the case for me. I enjoy watching the students wrestling with programs or issues or problems that come up and how they might resolve those things. And all of that develops those tools. I've talked about those things before, the 3 C's, creative thinking, collaboration, and critical thinking. So, creative, collaborative, and critical. That's right, there's my 3. However, that being said, and again, I would be remiss to point this out because all theories have the potential of negative effects. First of all, this is really time consuming. It is something that I've noticed even in myself as I've going through and trying to develop these new things, how much time it takes for me as a teacher to become competent and comfortable enough for me to engage then the students in this same process. So there's a lot of legwork that must be done by us as teachers in order to figure out how it works and then how it fits into these models. So the second thing that can be equally difficult is that the way that this functions in terms of its educational application does not readily fit in with standardized testing models. Now, there are standardized tests all over the world, all right? Doesn't matter what country you go to, you're going to have those types of models. So in Korea, the KSAT and other models. In the United States, the SAT. Canada does not have an official pre-university SAT like other countries do. But certainly there are standardized tests that fall over the course of the years of education from elementary all the way up to high school that does have these standardized models. Now, because of that, this particular approach, so things like Constructivism, PBL, and EdTech, do not necessarily lend to the rote learning that comes out of things like B.F. Skinner, for example, in terms of, or Piaget, where it's much easier to have students memorize certain concepts and then be able to recite those things either in a paper test or some kind of speaking exam. So that is also an issue. Now I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes and how we might be able to change the way we as English instructors here at university in Korea might actually be able to do that. So stay tuned because it's coming up. Now, the other thing is that it requires a great deal of differentiation, and it includes a fairly resource-intensive workload for teachers. So differentiation, what that is a recognition that each student is fundamentally a different learner. And because of that, because they're different learners, they come from different backgrounds, and they have different pre-existing knowledge about whatever topic you're teaching, the outcomes of what you hope will be achieved may be very widely, there may be a very wide continuum, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in terms of what those results will yield. Now, that's not to say that the process itself is fundamentally flawed. However, we as teachers must be aware that a student that has less outcome doesn't necessarily mean that they've learned less. It just means the outcome is different. And therefore, we as teachers need to provide a little bit of guidance, perhaps, to those students who require more outcomes in the final product. So that's also something to keep in mind. Also, it must be made aware that Constructivism, PBL, and EdTech also do have or also require a fair amount of resources from the teacher and with the students as well, and with the school generally, to perhaps use this to its best intent. And there will certainly be technological management issues that come into this in terms of the physical hardware, but also in terms of the software. Because as future videos will point out, a lot of this stuff is already there, web-based. So there's the learning of the applications online that are required, but also you need to have the tools in hand for that to occur. Now, at the university level, this might not be as fundamentally an issue. There's a wide number of, at least at my school, there's a number of computer lab rooms that are available. Most students have laptops or desktops at home. Most of them, at least that I could find anyway, most of them have laptops that they use if they're in a dormitory and they bring those for home. But of course, they also have this, the pocket computer, their smartphone. And I think it's pretty ubiquitous. I've never seen a student that doesn't have one of these. And therefore, some of this material can be done right on the phone. Now, because of its size, of course, that might be a limitation. So you're going to want to keep these things in your mind as you go through and create or pick the programs or the web-based things that you want to use, and keep those things in mind. For example, you might want to ask yourself, is this program going to be useful on a mobile device like a phone? Or can it be because of the size, can this program be used? If the program can't be used, or it's not particularly good and useful because you're using your thumbs maybe to navigate or your fingers to navigate rather than a mouse and keyboard, what other types of programs might you use instead to replace that? Okay, so that's a question that you as a teacher is going to have to take pretty seriously in this. However, that being said, there may be, again, opportunities for students to group work together within your own class, which means that not everybody is required to have a laptop. So let's say out of a group of 20 students, I might have 5, 6, 7, 8 students with laptops. That means I can have one student with a laptop that brings that laptop and have 2 or 3 people work with that person. So even though there's one person who is inputting the information physically into the computer, into the web-based program, there is a dynamic of sharing and engaging in that material. So that's something to certainly keep in mind, how that can be utilized. Now, as we've just talked about the pros and cons, let's go back a little bit and review a little bit more why I think the constructivist model actually fits a little better with what is being asked of the students. And I have a little website here that I'm using. So again, this information isn't coming from me directly, but I'm simply the conduit for you to understand a little bit about this. And I will leave a link below in the description for you to take a look at the website that I am using. So the first thing in terms of constructivism, we have to understand both the role of the teacher and the learner in the environment, whether that is an offline or online environment. And I'm going to use my own experience in the university in order to model examples. What I would ask you to do as you're listening to this is think about how you might use this model in whatever level of education you are teaching, elementary, middle school, high school. Now, elementary, I think has its own issues, and middle school and high school might be a little bit easier to use this, but I think in the elementary level there might be some extra issues that you would have to deal with. For example, if you're teaching a subject where there is limited or no pre-existing information, clearly some of that information is going to have to be taught first. So in this sense, you're going to have kind of more of a hybrid class where you bring in things like memorization and rote learning to give everybody the basic information that they must deal with, and then add on these other features in your classroom in order to have the desired outcomes in the long run. So let's jump into this. That's just an awareness that I have as well, and I hope that you do as well. So the first thing is teachers don't lecture, okay? It is not our job to spend our teaching time giving the students all of the information that they require. They write notes, take stuff, whatever, and then just expect them to memorize all of what we're saying. That is certainly not part of the, is not part of the constructivist model. However, what our role is to guide and shape the direction that we hope they will go to. All right, that is our role. So we become, in essence, facilitators of their work in the classroom. Certainly, the students are going to come up against problems. What we can do then is offer them choices that allow them to say, okay, if we go down this path, what might be the result? If we go down this path, what might be the result? And that's part of the learning process. If they choose the wrong direction, they're going to have to backtrack and restart again. That is all part of this learning model. So we don't give them the answers necessarily, but we give them options as to where they might end up going. So there is, in some way, shape, or form, very much a trial error type format, and there's also discovery. So that's one big area that constructivism really focuses on. The idea of rote learning that we talked about in our previous video really fits in with the model of passive learning, where students are simply just made to absorb the information and we hope that whatever we say sticks. Whereas constructivism works on more of an active platform where the students are engaged in utilizing their knowledge or learning new skills and then engaging with the material that you as a teacher has presented. Facilitator is dialogical between teacher and the student. As a facilitator, it's my job then to go around to the different groups, ask them questions, maybe give them a little focal direction so they don't get too off track. As a traditional teacher, in that behaviorism model, I simply just talk. We ask questions of our students. The students might ask questions to us and might ask questions of other students, in which case the students start to model the behavior of the facilitator in their group. Students come up with their own answers, right? What I think the answer might be and what the students come up with the answer might be different. And we might be shocked as teachers to find out, wow, you know what? I never thought about that as an option before. Well done, right? That's something that can really engage and really bolster the confidence of the students in these particular formats. The teachers see themselves as a co-learner. This is something that I pointed out to my students at the beginning of online classes. I told them that I was new at doing this. And because of that, I was learning as well. And in this type of format, I don't have to know everything, all right? Quite commonly in past formats, the teacher is required to know everything. And when we don't, teachers can often feel perhaps embarrassed because they don't know the answer to something. Well, the way that we can deal with that then is, well, you know what? That's a really good question. Let's figure that out together. And then I become a learner and the students become a learner simultaneously. It becomes a student-centered classroom, which is what I talked about earlier. And also, it allows the teacher to understand that some students are going to have different educational and learning needs. And as we can recognize that, we can perhaps skew or model our material slightly differently. Let's say, for example, in the EFL environment here in Korea, I have a student in a beginner class who is who is far more behind than than another student in the class. Their ability to process language has been significantly weakened over the years. So having even the basic type of conversation is fraught with emotional frustration. Perhaps they are extremely nervous about dealing with even the basic levels of hellos and goodbyes. See, that in and of itself is a differentiation between another student who at least can carry on some basic conversational skills. So in this model, I would need to, first of all, probably group that student up with someone who has higher level English language, and yet their Korean is still decent enough where they can interact with the information and have that kind of boost to their morale because they are in fact engaging the material even though they're not doing it in English. So that is something that we as teachers would need to be aware of as well. Now, we also want to be aware as teachers that we need to have lesson plans that are challenging but not too difficult. Because if they're too difficult for the students at whatever level, they're simply not going to stimulate learning. Students are going to turn right off and they're not going to engage the material. On the flip side, we don't want to have it too easy because then they're going to go through it very, very quickly and it's going to provide no feedback, it's not going to provide them with any learning whatsoever because they would have already known that. So there needs to be a balance between not something too hard, not something too easy, but just right that perhaps is just a little bit over where they are now. So they have to step up to that new educational reality. Hopefully, this can be sorted out relatively quickly. The other thing, of course, and this is something that many teachers are doing nowadays, is called scaffolding. And this is also something that the teachers can demonstrate, but then that the students can become aware of fairly quickly. Scaffolding basically is the support. Like think of how we might build we might put together a building, and there's scaffolding on the outside to give it its structure. And those walls are being held by scaffolding on the outside and perhaps internal supports that allow the walls not to fall over, essentially. And the workers can work around that scaffolding to build more, to build those walls higher. Once those walls are in place, the scaffolding can come down and internal building can occur in a way that once those outside walls are done. So in terms of the learning, the teacher can provide those supports, right? Can teach the concepts, right? Maybe there's a concept that needs to be dealt with first. That concept is the scaffolding. And then once that base information is provided, the students can get to work on whatever problems the teacher might give. Now, another area of learning that is particularly well suited is problem or inquiry-based learning. Now, I've talked a lot about this before. There's links in my channel. In the What Is It section, I would highly recommend going in and looking at the What Is It problem-based learning. The other thing that you can do is what is it called? Guided practice is another thing that we can do. Guided practice, or also known as the gradual release of responsibility, involves the educator, me or you, releasing the responsibility of their own education to themselves. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm giving over my teacher authority to them as students, and they take over that role for themselves. This is something called the I do, we do, you do, and it's something that I would recommend you taking a look at. Another thing that this model helps is cooperative learning. This, of course, is a way where we can, and I've talked about this with the 3 C's: collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. This is where I think the cooperative aspect of learning really hits its stride, because you are working in a team. Now, of course, there are times when teams don't work. That is part of the educational process. What happens if one member of the team just decides to do nothing? Well, that's going to be a teachable moment, because in the real world, not everybody in your team is going to be pulling their own weight. And therefore, that's something that the team members that are engaged in the material are going to find helpful. And that's a struggle that I think students these days can definitely begin to comprehend and understand. Play-based learning can be really helpful. This is more of the kinesthetic approach. This is something I used to do when I was teaching in elementary all the time. And it's a very, very valuable way of having students express their interaction with particular environments. There's so many ways that we can do this, even in an English language setting. If you want help with this, if you happen to be an elementary teacher, I'll give you some links in the comments below. If of course, you put a comment there and ask me about that. I'll give you a few tools, a few things that I used to use that are really fun for the students. Okay, so this second video then provides the kind of the theoretical structure for constructivism specifically, and why I believe that this approach, along with problem-based learning, along with EdTech, actually fit in quite well together. Now, in my next videos, the next several videos, what I'm going to be doing is introducing specific programs that you can use in your classroom, or that you can introduce to your students, and then they can work at home, perhaps independently or in a small group. So that's one thing I'm going to be doing. The other thing I'm going to be providing you is the tools by which the students can communicate with each other. All right. And because of that, those programs will be helpful for the students to maintain contact with each other, even though they are not in physical class together. And this is where I think we can model a system whereby in-class and offline learning can work simultaneously. So if we happen to have a second run of COVID, for example, and we're stuck not being in the classroom, these things can be easily grafted into an online classroom, again, when we know that the students have access to the basic technology that is required. Okay, that's always a caveat in these things. So video 3, I'm going to show you, start showing you what these programs are. I'm going to have on my screen, I'm going to show you what the program is, how it functions, and what you can do with your students in order for that to work. There are several that I have kind of in my mind, haven't really decided which one to use first, although I might consider Google Classroom as that first foray into EdTech, because that allows the teacher and the students to communicate effectively together outside of the classroom. Okay, that's it for me. My name is Dr. B. I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and the notification button because weekly updates are coming your way. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, be the revolution. Peace, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.